about family through the lens of sociology. And we left off, we talked a little bit about the different types and about selecting a mate, but now we're going to move into talking about the three sociological perspectives and how they view or describe or evaluate the family. So first we're going to move into functionalism. So remember, functionalism is all about that it looks at society as a system of interrelated parts and how each part has different functions or things that it's supposed to contribute to society. Functionalism likes balance, and if one part of society isn't pulling its weight or doesn't fulfill its functions, then it affects all the other parts of society. So it's kind of like this balancing thing that they're always trying to find that balance. So if a change happens in one part of society, it's going to affect all the other parts. So functionalism sees the family as providing many functions critical to society. The inertial learning experience, those early years that we talked about what children learn, and learning what it means to be secure, safe, how to interact with others, learning those behavioral expectations, learning how to interact with others and be a successful person in society. You get those basic human and social and emotional needs met, a caring environment, a loving environment, hopefully. Families regulate sexual activity, and it produces future generations. So when you have a family unit that's together, you know the expectations, what that interaction is going to produce, and it helps build a place where children can be raised and support those future generations. The family transmits social status. So moving, as I said before, statistically, the social class or the social status that you are born with, typically people stay in that same social class. So the family helps to socialize and generate those statuses and move them on to future generations. The family also provides economic necessities. So those things like that are our basic needs, like food, shelter, a warm, safe place. Typically, those are the functions of a family. So moving on to conflict theories. Remember, conflict theory is looking at moving away from inequality and moving towards equality between groups in society. And this happens through conflict, where one group realizes that they have fewer access to resources and things in society. And so they interact with the opposing group, and what they're trying to get is more resources and equal rights and equal shares to the opposite group. So conflict theory looks at how the family creates, supports, and legitimizes oppression in patriarchal societies. So here in the United States and traditionally across the world, due to hunter-gatherer status, remember when we talked about those different societies, those were generally patriarchal societies where traditions, money, wealth, resources flowed through the male side of family trees. Well, conflict theory basically states that because of these patriarchal traditions, the family creates and supports oppression, meaning that women, by nature, as being part of a family, have less power than the men in the family unit. So if you look at, let's look a little bit through history at different points in time where conflict theory comes out, because remember, women are fighting for more equal access to rights and justice and able to be more independent in society. So it started off in the 1920s with the women's suffrage movement, where women got more rights. They were able to do things. They were able to vote. Then in 1974, the women gained the right to have credit. So they were able to make contracts. Before then, If a woman wanted to buy a house, buy a car, they couldn't do so without a father or a husband. So let's think about that. Let's think about the women that we all know who live independently. And I wouldn't have been able to do that before 1974. And then the tradition of treating women as property is continued. Male dominance is considered natural and legitimate. So we kind of have this idea that the status quo, these traditions, are natural, that it's the way that things should be. But as you see through time, we have progress has happened, change has happened, and things have moved forward. I remember a couple of different chapters ago, we were talking about this idea that if something no longer fits within a society, eventually it will cease to exist. And that seems like the trend that we're getting on, and we're making strides, but this is still something that is happening within our society. Let me see to make sure I'm not missing anything. This, naturalness, or this idea that it's legitimate, also affects the women's workplace. We've talked many times about the things and the jobs that women traditionally go into are considered women's work, are paid less, are valued less within society, whereas the jobs that are traditional male-oriented are paid more. There's been a long-standing tradition and idea that men's jobs should pay more because they're the breadwinners in the family. Well, that tradition or that idea isn't so true anymore in our society, because more and more women are taking more of an active role in contributing to the household income and working outside of the home. So now let's look at symbolic interactionism. So symbolic interactionism really looks at that socialization process that happens within the family, about passing on things from generation to generation. It's the symbols, which can be language, which can be words, it can be behaviors that are taught from parents to children, and then they are learned throughout the whole life. Remember, the socialization process never ends. We have this luggage with us that we carry along throughout life, and we put things in it as we move along, and things when we learn. So symbolic interactionism looks at what happens, what roles we learn through this process. And when we are socialized into these roles, what inequality exists? Again, whenever we give little girls dolls and, play food or buy them little operated vacuums, in the houses, what kind of message is that sending to them? Especially when you give boys things like trucks and, sports equipment and things like that. It's really telling them what their roles are going to be, what the expectation is whenever they get older. So symbolic interactionists would advocate that whenever you are going through this socialization process, to share those things equally between boys and girls, so that way there's equity in that socialization process. And also, remember, this socialization happens in the school system. It's whenever we funnel girls into certain occupations and funnel boys into certain occupations, because those are the traditional occupations that boys and girls typically go into. There were some statistics I recently heard about children and about math, about how actually statistically girls have shown stronger math skills throughout the elementary years, and then when it gets to junior high, it kind of flips, whereas girls become disinterested in math, and boys then surpass them and move higher and typically go into those types of roles. So why is that? Usually we could identify something within our society, something that's going on that causes that to happen. Well, remember, during those junior high years, those are the foundational years where typically girls and boys, they start developing hormones, they're developing their self-concept, and They really care about what others think about them. It's where they're really being defined and put into these roles, and they identify which way they're going to go into. And just think about the social pressures around that. And it's been documented that at times boys in schools are encouraged to do one thing where girls are encouraged to do other things. So these are all things just to kind of keep in mind when you think about that socialization process. Okay, I think we are going to stop for this video, and then I'll be back in just a little bit and we will finish out the chapter.